All right, welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive?
Always.
Awesome. So today we're tackling analytic idealism. Definitely a fascinating one. It really kind of flicks the script on how we think about reality. Almost like we're stepping into a world that's more dreamlike than we typically imagine, and where our own minds play like a way bigger role than we usually give them credit for.
Exactly. It really shakes things up.
So for this deep dive, we're going to be drawing from Bernardo Kastrup's book, which came out last year, Analytic Idealism in a Nutshell. And he doesn't really mince words, does he?
Not at all. He comes right out and says, our culture's got it wrong about the nature of reality. We're clinging to this outdated view. He calls it physicalism, which he thinks is just plain, well, wrong.
So what is this physicalism thing? Like, break it down for those of us who, haven't spent years in a philosophy department.
Sure, sure. It's basically this idea that at the most fundamental level, the world is made of, well, physical stuff. And our minds, our thoughts, feelings, all of that, they're just kind of a byproduct of our brains. Like, the brain makes the mind, right?
Like the brain is the hardware and the mind is the software, kind of.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. But Kastrup, he says, hold on a second. Just because our technology, which is all built on this physicalist view, seems to work, doesn't mean it actually reflects the truth about reality itself.
He uses a really great analogy to make that point, doesn't he?
Yeah, the 5-year-old winning at a video game.
Right. Like, imagine a 5-year-old who can beat everyone at, I don't know, Call of Duty or something.
Totally. They're awesome at pressing the buttons, getting the results, but they have absolutely no clue about the complex code, the programming that's actually making the game run.
So we might be getting things done, building amazing things, but we're still kind of clueless about the bigger picture, the underlying reality. Okay, so I'm getting why Kastrup thinks we need a new perspective.
Right.
But how does analytic idealism, how does that offer an alternative?
Well, he says the key is to grasp this thing he calls the dashboard analogy.
What's the dashboard all about?
Right. Picture yourself in an airplane cockpit, right? You've got the dashboard in front of you with all its dials and gauges and whatnot. It's giving you information about the world outside, altitude, airspeed, all those crucial things.
Right, but it's not the actual world, is it? It's just a representation.
Exactly. That's Kastrup's point. The dashboard, it's super useful, helps the pilot navigate, make decisions, but it's not reality itself. It's a way for the pilot to interact with a reality that's actually far more complex than what those dials are showing.
Okay, I'm starting to see where you're going with this. Our senses, the way we experience the world, it's like our own personal dashboard.
Exactly. It's giving us information, it's useful, but it's not necessarily a literal, like a photograph of what's out there.
So what we think of as the physical world, the stuff we see and touch, it's more like information being presented to our minds.
That's the core of it. It's a representation of reality, not reality itself. And this representation, it's happening within consciousness, within the mind.
Whoa. Okay, so instead of thinking about a world made of, like, solid stuff, it's more like a world of, well, experience. But, like, whose experience?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. Kastrup says it's not even just human-like experiences. It's more like the universe itself is this field of experience, a mind at large, as he calls it. And our individual minds, they're like dissociated parts of this larger mind.
Dissociated parts. Okay, that sounds complicated. They're all, like, connected somehow.
Think about it like, like patients with dissociative identity disorder. They have these different alters who share a single mind, but each one experiences themselves as separate with their own viewpoint.
Oh, wow. That's a powerful analogy.
Right. So in a similar way, we're all experiencing our own individual realities, but we're actually all connected to this much bigger universal consciousness.
Okay, my mind is definitely bending a bit here. But if it's all in the mind, like, why does it feel so real? Why does it hurt when I stub my toe if it's all just, mental stuff?
That's a great question. And Kastrup says even that pain, it's still a mental experience. It's just a really, vivid and localized one. Remember the dashboard analogy? It's like a warning light flashing, telling you, hey, pay attention. Something needs attention over here.
So even physical sensations, at their core, they're mental.
That's the heart of analytic idealism. It's a radical shift from the materialist view that most of us kind of take for granted.
Definitely a lot to unpack there. So we're all connected, part of this universal mind, experiencing reality through our individual dashboard. But what happens to, like, our individual consciousness when we die?
That's where things get even more interesting and maybe a bit comforting too. Kastrup suggests that, what we call death, it might actually be the dissolving of those boundaries that create our sense of being separate.
So instead of an ending, it's more like emerging back into that universal consciousness.
Exactly. Like imagine a whirlpool disappearing back into the river. The water keeps flowing, but that distinct whirlpool form, it's gone.
Okay, now that is a really different way of looking at things. But if we're all just these dissociated parts, why are we separated in the first place? Why experience this individual reality at all?
Ah, that's a big mystery, and one that Kastrup spends a good amount of time exploring. He suggests it might be a natural process within consciousness itself, a way for the universe to experience itself, from countless different perspectives.
So our individual lives, with all their ups and downs and everything, they're all contributing to the richness and complexity of the universe itself.
That's the idea. A very different way of looking at things, isn't it? And it definitely raises a whole bunch of questions about, the nature of reality and what it all means.
Yeah, definitely a lot to ponder.
Eh.
All right, let's take a quick break to let all of that sink in before we dive even deeper into this analytic idealism rabbit hole.
All right, so welcome back to our deep dive into analytic idealism, where we're exploring this wild idea that reality at its core might be more like, well, mental, kind of like a shared dream within this vast universal consciousness.
And if we're all just these like dissociated parts of this bigger mind, what does that mean for like our everyday experience? How
Yeah.
does this change how we see the world around us, the stuff we interact with?
Yeah, it really challenges this basic assumption we have that our senses are giving us this direct line to an objective material world. Kastrup's saying, no, what we perceive as the physical world, it's more of a representation of this underlying mental reality.
So like a mental projection kind of.
Yeah, exactly. Like, think back to the dashboard analogy. Our senses, they're kind of like those instruments on the dashboard. They're giving us information, but it's information about mental states, not about material stuff.
So when I see a tree, I'm not actually seeing a physical tree, but like a representation of a mental state.
Exactly. It's part of your dashboard, your mind's way of interacting with and making sense of this universal consciousness.
Okay, but why would our minds create this, like, super elaborate dashboard of physical reality in the first place? What's the evolutionary advantage of seeing the world this way,
Yeah.
instead of just experiencing this raw mental reality directly?
Kastrup's argument is that it's all about, survival. This representational system, it allows us to interact with the world in a way that's actually beneficial for our, continued existence.
I guess it makes sense that our brains would evolve to filter and organize, the raw experiences of the universe. Otherwise, it'd just be completely overwhelming.
Imagine just being constantly bombarded with the raw sensory data of every mind connected to this universal consciousness. It would be total chaos. Our brains, they need a way to filter and organize that information into something that's manageable and meaningful for us.
So it's like our physical reality is this necessary illusion, a simplified version of a much more complex mental reality.
Yeah, you got it. It's like we're experiencing a kind of virtual reality, but the code that this virtual reality is running on, it's the universal consciousness itself.
But if that's true, what about, like, the laws of physics? If the world isn't really made of physical stuff, how do those fit in? Do they just disappear?
No, Kastrup's not throwing out the laws of physics. He's saying they're still important. He's arguing that they're more like descriptions of the regularities and patterns within this mental reality. They describe how these mental states, how they interact and evolve within the universal consciousness.
They're like the rules of the game, so to speak.
Exactly. They help us, they help us understand how things work, how things play out within this virtual reality that we're experiencing. But the underlying reality that those rules are describing, it's mental, not material.
Okay, that's starting to click. But I can't help but wonder, doesn't that mean that the laws of physics are kind of subjective? Like, if it's all mental, couldn't they change based on, our perceptions or something?
That's a good point. And Kastrup, he addresses that directly. He says that while our individual perceptions, they can, they can vary, the underlying mental structure of the universe, that remains consistent. It's like, think of it this way. We might all be looking at the same mountain, but from different angles, right? But the mountain itself, it remains the same. It's objective.
So the laws of physics are like a map of that mountain, describing its features, objectively, even though our individual experiences of those features, they might be different.
Yeah, that's a perfect analogy. And this brings us back to that idea that, even though we experience ourselves as separate individuals, there's this deeper level of interconnectedness going on. We're all part of the same mountain, so to speak.
Makes sense. But if the world is ultimately mental, what does that mean for like our understanding of ourselves? Are we just, bundles of thoughts and feelings with no real, substance?
Actually, Kastrup's view is it's quite different. He sees our individual minds not as these fleeting byproducts, but as fundamental aspects of the universal consciousness.
So we do have a real existence within this mental reality.
Oh, absolutely. We're like whirlpools in the river of the universal mind. Each whirlpool, it's distinct, it has its own unique characteristics, but it's also inseparable from the river itself.
And those whirlpools, those are what give rise to our sense of self, our individuality.
Exactly. But it's important to remember that the boundaries between these whirlpools, they're fluid, they're permeable. We're not as separate as we think we are.
So we're all connected, like drops in the same ocean. We're distinct, but inseparable from the larger whole.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And this interconnectedness, it has profound implications for how we understand our place in the universe. It's not just about us as individuals, but about us as part of this larger interconnected whole.
Okay, I'm starting to get the concept of this universal consciousness and the idea that our minds are a part of it, but there's still one piece of the puzzle I'm struggling with. How does this dissociation happen in the first place? How do we go from this unified universal consciousness to individual minds experiencing this seemingly separate reality?
Mm.
What's the mechanism behind that?
That's a really good question, and it's one that Kastrup grapples with too. He draws on, neuroscience, philosophy, even mystical traditions to try and understand how this dissociation happens.
So what are some of the explanations that he proposes? Like how does this separation occur?
Well, one of the key ideas he uses is this concept of cognitive boundaries. And these boundaries, they're not, physical barriers. They're mental constructs that create this sense of separation within consciousness.
So they're not like walls or fences, but more like filters or barriers within our minds.
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it. And Kastrup, he points to, things like dissociation in human psychology as evidence for these cognitive boundaries.
Oh, right. We talked earlier about dissociative identity disorder, where different alters within a single mind, they experience themselves as separate people.
Exactly. And Kastrup suggesting that a similar process, though obviously on a much grander scale, might be happening on the level of universal consciousness.
So our individual minds, they're kind of like alters, each separated from the universal consciousness by these cognitive boundaries.
That's the idea. And these boundaries, they arise naturally within this field of subjectivity, just like whirlpools, they form spontaneously in a river.
Okay, I see that, but what causes these cognitive boundaries to form in the first place? Why would the universal consciousness, separate itself into these individual minds?
Yeah.
What's the purpose or the driving force behind that?
That's where things get a little more speculative, and even Kastrup acknowledges that it's a really tough question. He offers a few possible explanations, but none of them are definitive. One possibility he brings up is that maybe this dissociation is just a natural process within consciousness itself, a way for complexity and diversity to arise, to emerge.
So it's like the universe is constantly exploring different perspectives and experiences through the creation of these individual minds.
Yeah, it's a pretty fascinating idea, isn't it? It suggests that our individual lives, with all their, joys and sorrows and everything in between, they're all contributing to the richness and the evolution of the universal consciousness.
It's definitely a very different way of looking at things than the materialist perspective, where individual lives are often seen as fleeting and insignificant in the grand scheme of things.
Exactly. Analytic idealism, it offers a much more, I guess you could say, profound and interconnected view of existence, where each individual experience, it's woven into the fabric of this larger evolving consciousness.
I'm starting to see the appeal of this perspective, but I have to admit it raises just as many questions as it answers. It's definitely a lot to take in.
Well, that's the nature of philosophical inquiry, right? It's about challenging our assumptions and exploring new possibilities and just deepening our understanding of the mysteries of existence.
Well, we've definitely explored a lot of ground in this deep dive. We've gone from questioning the very nature of reality to considering the idea that our minds are part of this larger universal consciousness. But there's still so much more to unpack, so many questions left to explore.
Oh, for sure. We've only just scratched the surface of analytic idealism. There's a whole universe of implications and possibilities waiting to be discovered.
Let's take a moment to process all of this before we dive into the final part of this deep dive. All right, welcome back to our deep dive into analytic idealism. Man, we've covered a lot of ground already, haven't we? I feel like my mind's been stretched in all sorts of directions.
Definitely been a wild ride so far, but challenging in a really good way, I think.
Sure. So we've established that reality might actually be like fundamentally mental at its core. That our individual minds, they're kind of like dissociated parts of this big universal consciousness. And that the physical world, the stuff we see and touch, it's really more like a representational system, like a dashboard, giving us just a limited glimpse of this much larger reality.
Yeah, we've been through the looking glass, but now the big question is what does all this actually mean for for how we live our lives? Like, it's one thing to grasp these kind of abstract concepts, but how do we actually apply them to our everyday experience?
That's the million-dollar question, right? Like, how does this change how we see the world, how we interact with each other?
Well, one of the most profound implications of this whole analytic idealism thing is this idea of interconnectedness, right? If we're all like literally part of this one universal mind, then we're fundamentally connected in a way that goes, way beyond our individual bodies, our personalities.
Almost like we're all like threads in this giant tapestry, all woven together by this universal consciousness. Kind of beautiful when you think about it like that.
It is. It is. And this interconnectedness, it has some pretty big ethical implications too. Like if we really recognize that shared nature of our being, it becomes much harder to justify, harming others or acting purely out of self-interest.
Right. It's like hurting someone else is ultimately hurting yourself. You're all part of the same interconnected web.
Exactly. Analytic idealism, it really encourages this more compassionate and empathetic approach to life, like recognizing that deep interconnectedness of all beings.
I mean, this idea resonates with a lot of spiritual and philosophical traditions, right?
Yeah.
Like this concept of unity and oneness. It's been around for centuries.
Absolutely, yeah. But what's really cool about analytic idealism is that it takes those ideas and it grounds them in a really rigorous philosophical framework, one that's compatible with modern science. It's not just some feel-good belief system, It's a perspective that's actually supported by both reason and evidence.
That's a powerful combination, and it leads us to another big question, doesn't it? The nature of death. Like if our minds are just these dissociated aspects of this universal consciousness, what happens when our physical bodies when they die?
Yeah, this is where analytic idealism, it offers a perspective that can be, well, it can be both kind of challenging and comforting at the same time, right? Kastrup, he suggests that what we think of as death, it might actually just be the dissolving of that cognitive boundary that's separating us, not the annihilation of consciousness itself.
So instead of an ending, it's more like a merging back into the universal mind, a return to the source, kind of.
Exactly, like a whirlpool that dissolves back into the river. The water itself keeps flowing, but the distinct form of the whirlpool, it's gone.
Man, that is a very different way of looking at death than the materialist view, where it's often seen as like a complete ending, a total erasure, kind of a
Yeah.
bleak outlook.
Yeah, for sure. Analytic idealism, it offers this possibility of a kind of immortality, but
Yeah.
not in the traditional sense of like an eternal soul or anything. It's more like a continuity of consciousness, a merging back into that larger stream of existence.
That makes me think, like, what does that mean for time and memory within this universal consciousness?
Yeah.
Like, could it be that time as we experience it, it's just another aspect of our limited dashboard perspective?
Yeah, that's a possibility that Kastrup, he definitely explores. He suggests that the universal consciousness, it might exist, outside of time as we understand it, like encompassing all moments, all experiences, all at once.
Whoa. Okay. Now that is a truly mind-bending concept. So past, present, future, it could all just be like illusions, just constructs of our limited perception.
It's a radical idea,
Yeah.
but it's one that aligns with some interpretations of quantum physics, and with those mystical experiences that people have reported, throughout history.
Okay. So If time is an illusion, what does that mean for like our understanding of free will,
Mm.
causality, the meaning of life itself? We're getting into some really big questions here.
Yeah, we are. And analytic idealism, it doesn't, necessarily give us like easy answers to those questions, but what it does do is provide a framework for exploring them in a whole new light. It encourages us to recognize that interconnectedness of everything and to question the limitations of our current understanding.
It's like we're being handed this whole new set of tools, this new language for grappling with these deepest mysteries of existence.
And it's up to us to use those tools to explore, to question, and to deepen our understanding of ourselves and the universe that we're all part of.
Well, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive into analytic idealism. We've gone from the nature of reality to the implications for our lives and our understanding
Yeah.
of death and even time itself.
It's been quite the intellectual journey, and hopefully one that leaves you with more questions than answers.
And that is really the beauty of philosophy, isn't it? It's not about finding these definitive solutions, but about continually exploring and questioning and expanding our understanding of the world, of ourselves, of everything.
So keep those minds open, keep those questions coming, keep exploring, keep digging.
And until next time, happy deep diving, everyone.